Hi everyone, I'm Sarah Greenborn, the Deputy Executive Director here at the Pinsker Centre. Welcome to this event with Mike Doran about the role of the Middle East in a changing global balance. This event has been set up by the Roger Scruton Centre, an initiative to honour the memory of the late Sir Roger Scruton, to continue his work through spreading his ideas through discussions at universities. We at the Pinsker Centre are proud to be partnering with them on this event. The Pinsker Centre itself is a think tank comprised of students and young professionals. We host discussions about international affairs with specific emphasis on how they impact the Middle East, like tonight's event, but also about British politics and about freedom of speech to broaden the conversation around these really important topics that affect all of us. We would also like to thank the UCL European Horizons as our campus partner for this evening. So that you hear more about our upcoming events, you can engage with us directly, or just hear more about what we do. Please remember to like both the Roger Scruton Centre and the Pinsker Centre on Facebook, and to follow our social media, our Instagram and Twitter. The social media handle for the Roger Scruton Centre is at r_Scruton_C, and the Pinsker Centre's is at Pinsker Centre. Please also make sure to check out our YouTube, because we post videos on that channel of our previous events. And if you've enjoyed this one, or you're just intrigued to see what else we have, I recommend going over there and subscribing. And also it includes our collaborations with the Roger Scruton Centre as well. Now to turn to tonight's guest, Mike Doran. He served in the George W. Bush administration as a senior director on the National Security Council and as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. He helped devise and coordinate the US strategies on a range of Middle Eastern issues, including the Arab-Israeli relations and American efforts to contain Iran and Syria. He is also a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. Tonight, he will be in conversation with Charlie Woods, who is the Programs Director at the Roger Scruton Centre and the Vice Chair of the Pinsker Centre. Now, we know you are going to have many questions for Mike Doran tonight, and Charlie will endeavour to get answers to as many of them as humanly possible. So when you submit your question, and that's when, not if, because we want all of them, whether that's using the Zoom Q&A function, or whether that's as a Facebook comment, please do remember to leave the name of your university if you attend one as well. That's it from me. So I'm going to hand you over to Charlie so that we can get this discussion going.
Welcome to everyone here tonight, and a big thank you to Mike Doran for joining us. Mike, it's an absolute honour and a pleasure to have you here tonight. And I'm just going to jump straight into it. Mike, you had a very similar experience to Roger Scruton, and you've actually even described yourself as a refugee from academia. For the many students who are watching us tonight, I want to throw back a question to you that you actually asked Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu of Israel last week, which is, which books should our students be reading and which sources should they be consulting to get the best possible understanding of the Middle East?
First of all, before I answer the question, let me just say thank you for having me. It's also a great honor and a pleasure for me. You may have wondered why I disappeared during Sarah's introduction. I thought I would prove to you that I am a Scrutonite. Wait, what is the proper adjective? Is it Scrutonite or?
Well, this is a debate
Scrutinarian.
It's an ongoing debate, and actually interesting, Mike. I don't know which you prefer, but there's Scrutonite, Scrutonian, and I think there's another one, some kind of there's another one, but it's escaped me. So whichever one you're happy with, I'm sure. And I noticed that you've actually got two of Roger's best books there, actually, because I'm also reading Fools, Frauds, and Firebrands.
These are actually, I have three. I don't know where the third one is. I was looking for it here. These were gifts to me from Ed Hussein, who I think is a friend of your
Yes.
center, if I'm not mistaken, and a student of Roger Scruton's. And Ed helped me to understand that I am a Scrutonian. It sounds like an old Etonian, doesn't it? I am so I'm only discovering, you know, my connection to his thought, but I was a disciple without realizing it. And so Ed sent me these so that I could investigate my connection a little more deeply, which I really appreciate. So in answer to your question, before we get to the Middle East, I think this is probably a very good place to start, to sort of ground yourself in really solid thinking, solid political thought. I realized only quite late in life. I mean, I don't know if it's late in life. I'm 58 years old, but it's really only in the last few years that I realized that the value of having a grounding in political philosophy, political thought. I don't think that I really have it. I mean, I've read a little bit over the years, but I wouldn't say that I'm really grounded. I started out in academia as an historian, and then I became a policy person. And then what I started noting after doing this policy job for a few years, is that the same arguments keep coming up over and over again. You know, the context changes, some of the details change, but structurally, the same arguments appear over and over again. So I think one of the best things that you could do, looking back on it now, I think one of the best things I could have done for myself, and I didn't do, was to get a grounding in political thought early on. My kind of dream, if you ask me to put together the sort of ideal international relations department, the first thing I would do is I would banish all political scientists, and I would look for individuals that had a certain cast of mind, and I would want people who did political philosophy, but had a strong interest in history. And at the same time, I would want historians who also had an interest in political philosophy. And I'd probably throw into the mix a couple of very well-chosen lawyers as well, but also military historians, and so on. But I would get rid of the political, especially the American political scientists. Let's see, I have another book around here. I'll show you my favorite, if I have it. I don't have my absolutely favorite book on. Yes, I do. Look at that. Amazing. See, right here, within reach. This is my absolute favorite book on international politics. And can you see that?
Oh, is that Martin Wright's?
Yeah, yeah. Power
Good.
Politics, Martin White, from the British school. Martin White and his student, Hedley Bull, who was Australian. I don't know if you're familiar with these guys, but this to me is he's the deepest thinker about international relations. But it's this British school. It's really almost unknown in the United States. I think if you're a PhD student, they probably, you know, when you're going to take your examination for your PhD, you probably have to at least show you're aware of the fact that he exists. It's just a way of thinking. It's so historically grounded. It is that Martin White is that's probably where I came up with the idea of this ideal international relations class or department, because he's this kind of guy. He has a background in political philosophy, but is very interested in history, and those are the deepest thinkers, I think. Now, if you ask me about the Middle East specifically, that's a real can of worms, because the Middle East is so contentious, that and frankly, Middle Eastern studies is an intellectual backwater. The number of the number of really first-rate thinkers that came out of the Middle East, study the Middle East, is very small. Off the top of my head, Bernard Lewis, Eli Kaduri, Fuad Ajami. These are the names I think one should be aware of. Notice that 2 of the 3 are British, by the way. And then after that, depending on what you're interested in the Middle East, subject by subject, you can find there's a good book here, there's a good book there, and then you just sort of have to read voluminously, and you have to start understanding the political perspectives of the writers that you're reading, because it's very, very contentious. Nobody agrees on anything. There isn't even an agreement on, in Middle Eastern studies in America, they won't read, Bernard Lewis is an imperialist, Zionist, Orientalist, which is a way of saying racist. It's a highfalutin way of saying racist, basically, in academia. It's an academic slur word. So that's where I would start. I would start with really absorbing Bernard Lewis and Eli Kaduri, who are different, actually. They don't have identical positions. But they're already a little out of date in the sense that there's a lot of Middle Eastern history that has happened after they passed away. Not so much history. We're in that era, in that span that's not yet history, but living memory. Certainly the memory of people your age. Lots of things have happened that you don't remember. I don't think there has yet to emerge a major figure analyzing the Middle East today, and I don't think one will emerge because of the sort of intellectual context that we're in now. Did that make sense? That was a lot of.
That was very, very clear. Actually, I think for our readers, bringing up Bernard Lewis is a great start. Bernard, I think, had one of the best grasps of the Turkish archives. I think unparalleled, at least from what I've seen. I'm sorry, we're jumping from our love, which is books, into policy, if that's okay, Mike.
Sure.
I'm going to go for ask you about the big question that is on everyone's minds at the moment, which is, what do you see as the impact of the incoming Biden administration on the current strategic alignments in the Middle East? From our perspective, we are getting stuff through the media which aligns basically the big powers in the region in 3 big camps, really, which is, Iran as the challenger, the pro-American powers, which, differentiate between Israel, Saudi Arabia, and UAE, and then I don't know if you'd quite agree, but perhaps, more independent powers, such as Turkey and Qatar.
Right. Yeah, I don't agree with that classification, and I'll explain to you why in a second. Let me start by, or actually let me start with the second part of your question and about the classification. More and more people are regarding Turkey as an anti-Western power, as a very problematic Islamist power. There's a whole doctrine that has emerged calling Erdogan's Turkey a neo-Ottoman. And in fact, John Bolton recently said in an interview while promoting his book that Erdogan is trying to undo the peace settlement from World War I. Frankly, I think this is nonsense. This is not how I understand Turkey at all. It is absolutely true that there is an Islamist dimension to Turkish policy, and in particular, support for the Muslim Brotherhood, political and media support for the Muslim Brotherhood. I think the Qataris are giving them money. Where a Muslim Brotherhood becomes absolutely actually jihadi in the case of Hamas, the Turks are supporting it politically. The Iranians are the ones actually giving it weapons. I think that's an important distinction. But I think that it's a mistake to put that Islamist frame around everything that Turkey does, which is what people are doing these days. And I come at the Middle East from a different point of view, and my point of view is that the job of the United States is to contain Russia and Iran, who I believe are the allies of China. I think that there is a tacit alliance. I co-wrote an article in Tablet magazine. Sorry to be self-referential, but it just easier for me to reference these arguments than to try to spin them out here. A few months ago, called China's Emerging Middle East Kingdom. And there we made the argument that my co-author and I, that China is the silent partner of the Russians and the Iranians, who are doing the dirty work on the ground of the alliance. So if the United States wants to contain China and it wants to keep China from undermining the American order in the Middle East, it has to contain Russia and Iran. And from my point of view, Turkey is a natural counterbalance to the Russians and the Iranians. Turkey is in serious friction, if not open conflict, with the Russians in Ukraine, Azerbaijan, Libya, and Syria, among other places. Now this is 21st century friction. This isn't Cold War friction. So we all know in the world today, there's lots of relationships where countries have complex relationships where in certain dimensions they'll be cooperating with each other, and in other dimensions they'll be in friction. You only need to look at say Netanyahu's Israel, and if you look closely at the Israelis, they have relatively productive relations with Vladimir Putin. At the same time, Putin is supporting the Iranians in Syria. He's in a symbiotic relationship with the Iranians in Syria. So I think you need to go back to basics. Martin White has a concept that he develops in this book, which I think is very useful, and that's the pattern of power. There are these alliance systems that are the key to understanding how powers behave. And the alliance system the United States has to be worried about is, okay, China in the distance, but on the ground in the Middle East, Russia, Iran, Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, Armenia. By the way, Armenia is part of the Russian, Syrian, Iranian system. That's the alliance system the United States has to worry about. That's the one that's undermining the United States. There is, on the American side, there is this friction, serious friction, even conflict between there's now a block. You can see Egypt, Israel, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE. That's a system of a subsystem of the American alliance system, and then there's Turkey in the north, and there's friction between the northern part of the American system and the southern part. No doubt about it. I think it's a mistake to divide those up into three different systems and say the Iranian system, the Gulf Israeli system, and the Turkish system. That's a mistake, because Turkey can sit comfortably under the American alliance system. That's the key. The key from an American point of view, from a British point of view, the key question is which powers can work comfortably under an American system. In my view, the Turks can. people argue that they can't. I don't think we want to turn this forum here into a big discussion about whether Turkey can or cannot. I would just submit to you that in my view, the United States turned against Turkey. Turkey didn't turn against the United States. There are elements of Turkey's policy, like the friction with Israel, that the United States needs to contend with. One of the jobs of the United States is to be a buffer and a mediator between its own allies that don't get along. This is nothing new for the United States. So the United States came into the Middle East first under Harry Truman on the side of the Greeks and the Turks. Simultaneously, the United States came in to support the Greeks and the Turks. That's Greeks and Turks don't get along. They never have. They never will. The job of the United States is to mediate and to balance. We balance between the and mediated between the Germans and the French, between the Greeks and the Turks. We can do it between the Israelis and the Turks. In fact, in historical terms, the conflicts between the Israelis and the Turks are like nothing compared to Greeks and Turks or French and Germans, right? There's no, in reality, the Turks and the Israelis have very little to fight about. And even while there is friction between them right now, they don't share a common border. There's no military friction. 40% of Israeli oil comes to Israel across Turkey from Azerbaijan. Israel and Turkey are both significant allies of Azerbaijan. They both supplied it with military support in the recent war. So the overlap of interest between the Turks and the Israelis is significant. I'm concerned, the reason I'm going into such detail about this is that I'm concerned that this neo-Ottoman doctrine that people like John Bolton and others are pushing is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you start saying that Turkey is an anti-Western power, it has to be opposed at in all of its policies, as the United Arab Emirates is doing, as Macron is doing. Macron and the UAE are up in Armenia, supporting Armenia against Azerbaijan. They're in Libya, supporting the Russians in Libya. On the southern flank of NATO, they're supporting the Russians. The Turks are opposed to the Russians in NATO. So the Turks are opposed to the Russians in Syria, and they are opposing the Russians unilaterally in Syria. So I think you have to start with, what do we want? What do we, the West, want? What does the United States want? It wants to contain Russia and Iran. Turkey's an absolutely indispensable partner. It's never going to be, it's not like the Cold War. It's not going to be as hostile to Russia and Iran as the United States are. But the key thing is that wherever Turkey is, Russia and Iran are not. Turkey's not a facilitator of Russian and Iranian power. It's a counterbalance. That's the key thing. So I went on for that too long, but so for me, the issue is there is an American alliance system that is in trouble, it's in trouble. The main problem with the American alliance system is that the leader of the alliance has forgotten what its role is and what its mission is. It's uncertain. It's uncertain in many ways. We are polarized between left and right, and there are two different pictures of the Middle East that are in contention between the Democrats and the Republicans. And I'll get to your Biden part of your question very quickly. But then also, even within, on either side, there's a lot of confusion about what the American role should be. So, you know, on the Democratic side, there's the crazy left of the progressives, who basically want to get out of the Middle East and who regard all of America's allies, Israel, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia, as the devil. And they want to embrace Iran, and they're presenting the embrace of Iran as the solution to America's problems regionally. You know, simultaneous American withdrawal or stepping back from the Middle East with an embrace of Iran. Then there are the centrists on the Democratic side. You know, that's sort of Biden and his team of technocrats that he is that he is appointing. They're gonna be always moved by the progressives in their party to move in the direction that I just stated, of embracing Iran and distancing themselves from our own allies. But they're going to be somewhat reluctant to do that, and they're going to have to deal with the actual problems on the ground in a practical, pragmatic way. But my biggest concern about what they're going to do that's going to change the dynamic in the Middle East is they're going to run back to the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal. Obama sold that deal to the Americans as a narrow arms control deal with no broader political or structural implications, and that was completely a matter of packaging and false advertising. Obama knew very well that he was changing the whole concept of what the United States should be doing in the Middle East. He publicly introduced the idea that the United States is holding the balance between its traditional allies, Saudi Arabia and Israel, and Iran. So we're no longer the leaders of a coalition designed to contain Iran and Russia. We are now sort of mediators in the middle, holding the balance. The JCPOA, I don't want to talk here too much, so I'll just say a couple of sentences and then stop. And I won't be able to totally unpack this idea. But the JCPOA is much more than just an arms control agreement. It is part of this whole, it's the key to this whole restructuring and positioning the United States, posturing the United States as the power that's holding the balance between the two. This to me is a disaster because in one sentence, what it's going to do ultimately is it is putting the Iranian nuclear program under the protection of the American power. You can see it already. You can see it already where it leads when the Israeli, I assume it was the Israelis who killed Dr. Fakhrizadeh a couple of weeks ago in Iran, the head of the Iranian clandestine nuclear weapons program. And then you have John Brennan, for example, President Obama's chief of the CIA, who comes out and says this is a war crime, right? So the implication is that that the United States is going to restrain Israel from killing the guy who's going to build the atomic bomb that could wipe out Israel. Instead of supporting our ally against the Iranian nuclear program, we are going to restrain it. That means we are protecting the Iranian nuclear program, which, as I say, is a Chinese project. If you're China and you don't want to go head to head with the United States in the Middle East, but you want to weaken the American hold, the American hegemony, military hegemony in the region, how do you do it? Well, you convince the American left that the smartest thing it can do is protect the Iranian nuclear program. This to me is total insanity. So that's where we're headed, and that's the fight we have to have, I think, in the coming year.
If I may follow up on that slightly, Mike. One of the things that's been posited, I believe, is that some have said, well, it won't quite be the same Iran deal that we saw with Obama, that there may be some tightening. Do you think that there's the possibility that some aspects of the deal that were quite weak a few years ago could be tightened up? Or should we really be preparing for Iran to refund its militias in Yemen, Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria in effect? Do you think there's any chance that the deal could be improved, or do you think that effectively it will simply go the same way?
It will go the same way. It has to. It's structural, and if you're listening to what Biden is saying, he's saying here's how he sells the idea that you just presented. I'm going to return to the deal, and then I'm going to negotiate the follow-on deal, and that's where I'm going to tighten up. right? And that is absolute nonsense because the deal gives them everything. The deal basically gives them the bomb because of these sunset agreements that were in the deal. All of the restrictions on the deal up front legitimates Iran's nuclear program, and then that's point one, and then it legitimates it, but puts certain temporary restrictions on the program, which disappear over the next decade. So if you return to the deal, you have given them already no restrictions on their program. If you're Iran and the deal has already given you that, why would you ever agree to a follow-on deal? You have no. The only way you get a follow-on deal with the Iranians is by the only way you get JCPOA 2.0, which has the permanent restrictions on Iran's nuclear program that any sensible person would want from a regime like that, is by doing away with JCPOA 1.0. You can't get to JCPOA 2.0 through JCPOA 1.0. You can't do it. And so this is where it becomes, I think, very dishonest, because anybody with a brain who's actually read the deal can see that it gives Iran everything. So they know it. They know that that's what they're doing, and they are dissimulating at best, lying at worst, when they tell us that they're going to be able to come up with this magic JCPOA 2.0 after giving Iran everything at once, enriching it, helping it solidify its military relationship with Russia and China, because part of the JCPOA is an end to all of the restrictions on conventional weapons. So we're going to build. We're not just using American power to legitimate the Iranian nuclear program. We're also helping Iran to build its military alliance with Russia and China. And then we're going to say, then we're going to sit down and we're going to force them to make concessions. It's not going to happen.
I'm going to jump into a few questions from our audience. Theo from the University of Leicester asks, how do you think an incoming Biden presidency will change relations within the Middle East itself? So will we effectively see more independent action from Saudi Arabia, UAE, and Israel against Iran, and even perhaps Turkey as well against Iran, independent of the United States? Or do you think there will be a sort of some other realignment that we haven't quite seen yet?
If you saw a kind of frustration across my face, it's because I've been asking myself that exact same question. And the frustration was, I don't have a really good answer. I think it's one of the key questions we have to be asking ourselves right now. And I think we have to watch very closely to see what happens. Here's my dream scenario, which is not going to happen. but let me just show you the dream scenario. Let me start with the absolute fantasy scenario. And my fantasy scenario is that in recent days we've seen news reports about a slight warming. Warming is even too strong of a word. We've seen feelers between Ankara on the one hand and Riyadh and Jerusalem on the other. We've seen some signs that the Saudis aren't totally happy with some of the more aggressive positions that the UAE has been taking against Turkey, and if we could have an improvement of Saudi-Turkish relations, for me the golden triangle is Ankara, Riyadh, Jerusalem. This is the Saudis, the Israelis, and the Turks are the three pillars of a sane American strategy designed to contain the Russians and the Iranians. They're the three legs of the American footstool in the region. You can't. The stool cannot stand up on two legs. The United States has to have a regional order, and that requires those three powers, because they're the only powers that can project power beyond their borders. There's problems with each of them in doing that effectively, but they're the only ones who can even begin to do it. You cannot build a regional strategy on Jordan. As lovely as Jordan is, it's not not a knock against Jordan as an ally. It's just about the attributes of the ally. It doesn't have the power to do it. You can't build it on Egypt. Egypt can't really project power beyond its borders. Look, Egypt is right next to Libya, and Egypt is in an alliance with the UAE, France, and Russia, and that alliance cannot prevail over Turkey, who sent a band of mercenaries, into Libya. So here you have a country that's right on the borders of Europe. Europe has vital interests in Libya: energy, terrorism, and refugees, or migrants from Libya. And Europe doesn't have the power by itself to impose an order on Libya that will protect Europe's interests. Turkey intervenes with a very modest force. I mean, compared to the kind of deployments the United States makes, and it frustrates the Russians, the French, and the Egyptians. So you need those three powers. Without any one of them, the American stool falls. So ideally, my fantasy, my absolute fantasy situation is that the Turks get together with the Saudis, and they also get together with the Israelis. When I say get together, they're not going to become, blood brothers and love each other, but they just put their major differences aside, lessen the tensions, and then the Saudis, the Israelis, and the UAE, and the Egyptians and the Jordanians, for fun as well, all go out and make a joint statement against the JCPOA. I would love that, right? But this is, like I say, this is a fantasy. Now, here, let me take the fantasy down one more notch. What if the Benjamin Netanyahu and Benny Gantz and Gabi Ashkenazi, that is the Netanyahu and his coalition partners and enemies in the crazy Israeli system, what if they got together and made just in Israel, made a joint statement against the JCPOA? Now, I don't think it's going to happen. Well, I would love it to happen. I would hope it would happen. But I think what's going to happen is that the Americans are very good at driving a wedge, and the Democrats are very good at driving a wedge between Netanyahu and blue and white in Israel. And in Israel, with all of American allies, there's always the question: when America does something that they don't like, do we openly stand against it, or do we pretend to like it in order to curry favor in Washington? And the Israeli left, when Obama came out with the JCPOA, the Israeli left said, okay, it's not ideal, there's a lot that's wrong with it, but we can work with it and then work for JCPOA 2.0. That was the and so I haven't been following the Israeli press closely in the last few days, but I suspect that that's the kind of noise that you're going to hear out of Benny Gantz. That then allows Biden to say the Israelis are opposed to the JCPOA. That's not true. The opposition is only from Benjamin Netanyahu, and we all know that Benjamin Netanyahu is an extremist right-wing figure, right? Very divisive, and Benjamin Netanyahu is dividing. He has turned support for Israel in the United States into a partisan issue. And we want to get back. I, Joe Biden, want to help. I'm a great supporter of Israel, and I want to help the pro-Israel community in the United States to become bipartisan again. So how do you become bipartisan again? By supporting the Democrats while they support while they extend American power umbrella over the Iranian nuclear program. That's how you do it. But out of in an effort to manage the Americans who are so powerful but so fickle, in order to manage them effectively, the allies are going to there's always going to be a tendency on the part of the ally to say, oh, America's policy is great, but we just have this, we want to tinker with it on, on the side. The same thing is true with the Saudis. The Saudis are low. The Saudis never came out against, the Saudis hated the JCPOA. They thought it was awful, an abomination. You can't find a public statement by the Saudis during the Obama administration where they said anything like that. For the same reason that that blue and white is, the only guy who stood up in the world, the only leader who stood up and said this deal is an abomination was Benjamin Netanyahu. Now, when he did that, he spoke for a lot of other people in the Middle East. What's a little different this time than last time is, one, all of the arguments that the Obama administration put out about the JCPOA have been refuted by absolutely successfully, I think, by the Trump administration. There's the choices between JCPOA or war, for example. That was one of their main messages. Well, that's obviously not true, because Trump threw out the JCPOA and Iran threatened war, but when it came down to it, it understood that the United States is a superpower and it is not. And the United States could crush it like a bug if it wanted to. That's what matters in international politics more than anything else. So that has all been refuted, and Donald Trump is still part of our politics. He got half the electorate voted for him, and a very large percentage of that electorate, of those who voted for him, think that the election was stolen by the Democrats. Donald Trump is going to be carrying out rallies all across the country, while Joe Biden is aligning the United States with the Iranians once again. And so he is going to have to answer. There's going to be a very vigorous opposition on the ground in the United States to what he's doing. There's going to be some opposition from the Middle East, certainly from Netanyahu. I don't know about the Saudis. I don't know about blue and white and so on. And we have to see how that all plays out. And there's also, I doubt that a lot of the Democratic senators who were originally opposed to the JCPOA, like Chuck Schumer and Menendez and so on, I doubt that they love the idea of going back to the JCPOA. They probably don't want to stand up against their president, Joe Biden, and say that, but behind the scenes, they might be telling him that. So it's going to be a very interesting dynamic. And that, I told you I couldn't answer the question, and then I talked about 10 minutes of not answering it. It's a great question, however.
Mike, a question from Arba Yeager, who's a graduate from UCL, is in regards to the internal strength of some of these particular nations. He gives the example of Saudi Arabia and the fact that the current Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, has, I think now over 300 cousins, whereas his father, King Salman, only had a certain number of brothers. With countries also like Turkey, where we've had, a long history of coups, what is the danger to these nations of internal friction and implosion? We've seen the collapse during the Arab Spring of several nations, and do these two major powers have the risk of sort of long-term internal strife, which could actually severely weaken them and weaken the alliance that you're talking about?
The two major powers being Turkey and Saudi Arabia?
Yes.
Yeah. In the case of Turkey, I would say much less. Turkey Turkey is as close to a classic nation state, you know, Britain, France, that you get in the Middle East. I mean, I guess the closest you get in the Middle East is Egypt. In the case of Turkey, you have the Kurdish question, which is an impediment to national cohesion, obstacle to national cohesion. But basically, Turkey is a very stable nation state, and there's a glue in Turkey between state and nation. There's a long state tradition. It was, you know, Turkey being the heir to the Ottoman Empire, and then there's a kind of a glue in Turkey, which is why Turkey was able so quickly. I mean, if you go back and listen to the arguments the Obama administration was making in Syria in 2013, 2014, saying, well, for those of us who were saying you should be aligning with the Turks in Syria instead of opposing them, the Obama administration said, well, they don't have the power. They don't have any military power, which was momentarily true because of some of the upheaval that you had in Turkey, because of the before the coup, you had the Ergenekon scandal and so forth, and so there was some you know, sort of a temporary, a vacuum is too strong, but a temporary weakness on the part of the Turkish military, exacerbated then later with the coup. But look how quickly they turned it around, and look how they're flexing their muscles all around the region. They're now militarily involved. I don't know in how many countries. They're in Qatar, they're in Libya, they're in Syria, they're in Iraq, they're in Azerbaijan, and so on. No other country in the region can do that. And the speed with which they turned it around and then showcased these capabilities is really quite impressive. And the people who were working against Turkey and that is basically the same team that's coming in now with Biden. Those officials need to actually sit down and ask themselves, how did they so badly miscalculate with regard to Turkey? How did they so badly assess the actual balance of power between the forces in the Middle East? The United States is operating in Syria and in Iraq at how would I put it? At the pleasure of the Turks. By which I mean to say, if the Turks decided that they wanted to make life impossible for us there, they could do it rather easily. And we have gotten so used to sort of riding roughshod over them that we started to think that that's the natural order of things. And I think part of what Erdogan and his advisors are doing is they are educating the United States in the geopolitical realities of the Middle East. So I don't, you know, even if there was some kind of momentary turmoil in Turkey, the whole history of the country in the modern era suggests that we should be calculating about a stable Turkey, not an unstable one. And it's certainly not going to go. Turkey's never going to go the way of Syria because of that glue. Saudi Arabia, it's more complex. Saudi Arabia, there's probably more fragility there than in Turkey. But people have been predicting the demise of the House of Saud since it took power. And again, I think that that would be an unsafe bet. It's not a country I would want to put an enormous amount of pressure on. But it's also a country that we don't want to, you know, we don't want to have to deploy American troops there. So we should think, you know, when the Iranians attacked Saudi Arabia, when they hit the Abqaiq refinery, we didn't defend it. I think that was a mistake. In the end, then Trump, I think, turned around and he killed Qasem Soleimani shortly thereafter, which you can see as a kind of an answer to the attack on Saudi Arabia. And I think that made up for some of the failure to defend the Saudis. But you can imagine the situation if there were no American power mediating between the Iranians and the Saudis. The Iranians would put enormous military pressure on Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia, under that situation, could very well buckle. So that's what I think we should be worried about more than anything, is an America that doesn't defend its allies rather than an America that does.
How would you then rate the legacy of Donald Trump's administration's foreign policy against his predecessor then? You've been quite outspoken previously in your thoughts in terms of the very clear switch when the Trump administration took over.
So awesome instincts. Donald Trump, this is the thing you're dealing with Trump all the time. In domestic politics and in foreign policy, he has just uncanny instincts. I think he is weaker on coalition building, presentation of the vision, the vision behind the instincts, or that might explain the instincts, and spotty implementation. Sometimes implementation that was hit and miss. I have been saying since Trump started, really from day one, that the difference between Trump and Obama is that Trump has returned us to the concept of the United States leading a coalition. And I think that is, I think that's absolutely true. But you would be hard pressed to find a Trump statement that where he said that that's what he was doing, and explained what the ideas behind it were and how it was all going to work. And so you get situations where there's contradictions between some of the key policies and then some of the, let me give you an example instead of talking in the abstract. We have the maximum pressure campaign that Trump came up with. I mean, leaving the JCPOA, putting maximum pressure on Iran, particularly maximum pressure means economic sanctions, backed up by some military activity, such as the killing of Qasem Soleimani, but also the support, for example, the Israelis when they take action against the Iranians in Syria. Then you have all these trips by senior Trump officials to Lebanon to help save Lebanon. And now it's an American initiative to demarcate the maritime boundary between Israel and Lebanon. Why? So we can get economic investment in Lebanon. Now, the Lebanese system is dominated, controlled by Hezbollah, which is Iran's #1 proxy. Why are we trying to generate private sector investment in Lebanon? Why haven't we completely sanctioned with maximum pressure the banking sector of Lebanon, that is the banking sector of, that is the financial sector of Hezbollah? Well, we give it a pass. So we're actually now, American policy is actually working with the French and the Russians to bring in private sector investment in Lebanon. It's a complete contradiction. It makes no sense. And the U.S. is another area that's of interest to me. I just came back from Azerbaijan. The U.S. was basically aligning its diplomacy with the Russians in Azerbaijan. Now, the U.S. was kind of asleep on Azerbaijan. So to say it aligned its diplomacy is an overstatement, because it was mainly asleep. But when it woke up, during the war, it woke up a few times and it mumbled a few sleepy statements, and they were completely consistent with what the Russians were trying to were trying to do. And you would have the rise as I read the pattern. Where'd he go? Here he is. Oh, one more time. As I read the pattern of power in the Middle East, Azerbaijan is the ally of the United States. Well, it's not an ally of the United States, but it's an ally of Israel. It's an ally of Turkey. Its military has been trained to a NATO standard by a NATO military, Turkey. Turkey has muscled its way into the Caucasus and forced Russia to share power within the Caucasus. It's containing Russia, and it's doing even greater containment of Iran. The pressure that the rising Azerbaijan puts on Iran is enormous. So if you have a maximum pressure campaign against Iran, you should be in there on the ground, making sure that Azerbaijan wins and making sure that it's protected from the Armenians and the Russians. You certainly don't want to do anything that's going to help the Iranians and the Russians. But that's where American policy was moving. So I can find all around all these little areas where the policies that are being implemented are not consistent with the big ideas that the administration had, and that's a failure of the White House to develop the grand strategic concepts behind the major initiatives, and then to make sure that it's consistent throughout. Because what happens is, and you can see it if you read John Bolton's book. There's a lot in Bolton's book I don't agree with, but I think Bolton is honest. And I think when he describes the way that Trump interacts with people, you see that you get a demand signal from Trump on certain issues. I want this, I don't want that. But there's never any effort to elaborate it and explain it. And so what happens is that you can get in a lot of different areas, different parts of the bureaucracy can kind of just freelance and go do whatever they want. And it doesn't turn out to be a kind of coherent strategy in the end. So I give him, on the big stuff, that China, Iran, the killing of Qasem Soleimani was exactly the right thing to do. Nobody but Donald Trump would have done it. Moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israeli law in the Golan Heights, all of that, those were beautiful steps which nobody other than Donald Trump would have done. So I give him A+ on all of those impulses. B- on larger concepts and policy cohesion.
Sarah from Durham University asks on Facebook, what does China's Belt and Road Initiative mean for relations with and between the countries of the Middle East?
Aha. Well, I'm going to punt on that one, or not punt. I'm going to make it easy for you. Go read Michael Doran and Peter Rao in Tablet Magazine, China's Emerging Middle East Kingdom. 10,000 words there that explains all of it. But if I were to do it here, the show would be over and I'd still be talking.
Okay, well, I think we've had a ton of fantastic questions tonight. We would love to continue, but I think we have to let Mike go. So from all of us here at the Roger Scruton Centre and our partners, the Pinsker Centre, as well as thanking UCL European Horizons, I want to thank you, Mike, for coming today. Thank you for your incredible insights on the Middle East. I think we've all become much more informed about what's going on there, and we're very, very grateful for your time tonight. And we look forward to hearing more about your enjoyment of Roger Scruton as you get into the next level. So hopefully we will get to invite you back and in person and discuss further.
Sure, anytime. Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed it. Take care and have a good night.